Hello, I am Radagast, and welcome to Global Mission to Peace and Mystic View number 27. This topic tonight will be Annunaki, God, gods, goddesses, and trying to make some sense of what it all might mean and why we would even care. And of course, I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, or I should actually say co-host, Shelley.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, I'm not the host, we're co-hosts. All right, so Annunaki. Now, of course, we did a few shows back, where we played around with Nibiru and tried to give it at least some credence for there is something out there that's being picked up, and whether or not it's the Nibiru from that Sitchin declares, because there are certain people who say that when you actually read the tablets that he decoded, there is no true Nibiru in the records. That's just, I don't read Sumerian, so I can't go there. It'd be an interesting question next time we have Dan on to ask him that, where Nibiru comes from. But we're trying to every time work with some of the ideas that go through the alternative community and bring some form of coherence. Try to get have something that takes it out a little bit out of the woo-woo. Having done some of our own due diligence on some of these things and looking into it and trying to, through the multiple layers go, okay, this looks like there's enough commonality with this that you start seeing that there's enough meat on this bone that we can kind of go with it. Where a lot of times what you do is you'll find it, and what it is, you'll go to places and you'll see recurrent themes, and then you see the extras, the fat. And so we're going to just try and work with the good stuff and not the extra. I could start, but let me just, in case you want to get going, say something, Shelley, before I usually.
Well, just to say that there are so many points of reference for Annunaki or Nibiru, and my own interest in this began so many years ago because I wanted to know, what is the language of light? I'm trying to find the origin. There is so much disinformation, and we know every time our history is written and rewritten, it's done so in accordance with whoever happens to be holding the reins at the time.
Yes.
So I was trying to locate some sense of truth, some way, and what I came to in this search for the language of light was a language called Hebrew. Now, that was the ancient Hebrew. Yes, of course, there's Sumerian and all that before that, but it was Hebrew with something that sounds an awful lot like Nibiru. So I thought that's pretty interesting. So that's kind of the journey I took, is from that perspective. But it's pretty fascinating, all the characters. If we take Enki, for instance, he has so many names. Now, is that all those names because he keeps reappearing in our history, keep coming back to us? Is this because they're embedded in our DNA? What do you think?
Well, I think that's part of the answer. The other thing is the different names in different languages, and then also titles associated with names.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens a lot, even with biblical characters who a lot of times are in fact part of the Anunnaki, but sometimes they're called by one or other name or one or other title. And sometimes one name has multiple titles because they actually had multiple duties.
Well, yeah, functions, the function of the name.
And so that doesn't help with identifying who's who, because sometimes we could think we're talking about 7 different people, and we're actually talking about one person with 5 of those names, and maybe one other person with 2 names or 2 other people. So what looks like 7 people is 3 people. And I'm not sure, to take a list of names and then parse that out, I think would be boring and like kind of scholarly, which is not the mystic view way we normally roll. We usually try to keep it conversational, somewhat animated, and not dry. but let's start. I would like to start with just the concept of the Anunnaki. It seems like the Anunnaki was kind of launched into our consciousness through the work of Zecharia Sitchin, or Stitchin. I think it's Sitchin though. And he supposedly he taught himself, or was a Sumerian scholar, so he could read the languages that were written in cuneiform. And I'm not sure there's only one. Because there's also Akkadian branches, and according to Dan Winter, there are actually two different languages. One that comes from the Draco line themselves, that women spoke one language, men spoke another. Now, if that seems strange, anybody who's done deep history into the Aboriginals of Australia, they also had one language for women and one language for men. And this seems to be kind of hearkening back to those star origins, where part of that has to come with at least with not the Anunnaki per se, because the Anunnaki is really a specific, almost like a family group from a larger group of like beings, many of them reptilian. But as we find out, especially I'm going to introduce a new name for a lot of people who who think they've been dealing with the Anunnaki. They've maybe read every one of Zechariah's books. There's a man named Anton Parks, and he's French. And the first book he wrote was The Ages of Uras. Okay, Uras. And we'll get into parsing out those kind of things also. But it was written exclusively in French. Now, there was a man named Jerry Zeitlin, who I think he got people to do translations, and he had a website called Ages of Uras, where all the English translations were. And it was some of the richest material about not only just the Anunnaki generally, but I mean, because it came from Anton Parks, who supposedly had come upon a crystal, which he knew was a Gerku, was actually the basic, it was the hard drive. It was a crystalline hard drive with all this stored energy on it, and he was able to tap into it and download memories from it. In which case, he then had this whole story to write called The Ages of Uras, which is really about what has happened on Earth with cosmic perspective history that is relevant to what happened on Earth. It's a deep story, way beyond Zecharia Sitchin. This isn't to make Zechariah buffoonish. We're not looking to diss him at all. But he kind of brought one layer, and the chances are that one layer sitting around there has allowed us at least be conversant with some of the characters. Because just like watching a movie, a play, reading a book, you have characters. And unless you can recognize the names, the story doesn't make a lot of sense. One of the biggest complaints of Tolkien's work was how many names were in there. Nobody knew who he was talking about. So if we come to Zecharia Sitchin's work, we have two names that stick out above all. Well, maybe three names: Anu, who supposedly is dad, and his two sons, and Enki and Enlil. And Enki had one mother, and Enlil had another mother. Now, to say that they were mothers is also a little interesting. We should say they each had a female contributor to their genetics. It wasn't like these boys crawled out of bellies. In some of the Sumerian tablets, you actually see these kind of huge vats and you'll see bodies kind of floating in there. And that's how they were cloned. They came out as adults. They were never babies. They came out as fully functioning adults, ready to go. Maybe had to dry off a little bit. And but they had two different lineages, and the lineage of the female contributor to Anu for Enlil was of a royal line, and the Enki's mother was from a life designer or kind of a priestess line. of a term that we will want to get acquainted with, which is Kadishtu, which is where the word caduceus comes from. But Kadishtu in their language, or one of the, maybe even Sumerian, means life designer. So anyway, so this is our main cast of characters for now. And the ones that anybody who's read Sitchin knows, basically Anu, who doesn't figure much in the story other than he's dad. And then we have two sons, and because of who Anu did a test tube, did a cloning with, was from the royal line, Enki, and Enlil got to be the Lord of the Earth when he arrived. He arrived on Earth after Enki, according to Anton Parks. And when you read Anton Parks' work, it really adds up. And it kind of makes us understand that there was a long progression. I'll stop for a second in case you want to come in.
You are doing a fantastic job of covering everything. I'd like to come back to the Kadishtu. That's so important because this is with a reference to the reptilian. No, let's not call it that. Let's call it serpentine. Let's call it kundalini. Let's call it plasma energy. Let's talk about how Anton Parks found this crystal. That's a great story, and we hope to be bringing that to you, in the very near future. But how Anton Parks has this crystal that he's able to take information out of. The crystal has stored all this information in the same way that our DNA, we also is that crystalline palace that we refer to as the pituitary, the thalamus, and the pineal. And that is also saving all this information for us to access as we are able to line up the bits of information and access that. All of that information is there. So as above, so below. It exists within us, and yes, it's all around us as well. So that is part of our DNA. And we have the Kadishtu.
And of course, the DNA spirals up as if just like a serpent.
Exactly. And then also, if I don't want to confuse people, but if we can at least understand that Enki has another name, Samael, because Anton Parks, I believe, uses that name.
He uses Saam, S-A-A-M,
right.
But
that's the short.
Yeah.
Right. And then Saam also had the female counterpart, Samothea. And she is the one who is considered to be the element that gave us the God spark, or that element in our DNA that then we can connect and know them in our own crystalline palace, in our own DNA. Or we can do it, we can, read Anton Parks' book. But I'm really glad you brought up Anton Parks, because this is also available, the story is also available on video now, so it's pretty easy.
Well, apparently there's two new books that are now out that have been translated in English. And I think one is Secrets of the Dark Star, and the other one is, I don't know if it's just called Eden or not, or some, a few words before Eden. But these are the two new books. And Eden, and I think what these books do, at least Eden does, is Eden is in large part some of the material that was originally presented in the ages of Urus in French. Now, with a certain part of that, because it was a huge story going on. So I think the Eden will be more of the formative, or what we might associate with the beginnings of humanity. And
I like the Eden thing. The Eden thing is the E at the temple of Apollo, but Ea, another name for Enki. Yes. And Ea is significant to water. It's telling us about water.
Well, Earth,
it's the house of water is what it means.
Earth is a water planet. And Ea, what does Earth start with? EA.
Yeah. Right. And also he was considered to be the god at Eridu. Now that's the river constellation of the heavens. Mm-hmm. So again, water. And water was also the era of consciousness. So we have all these correlations that are all validating this very important element about our consciousness and who we are and how we got here. Mm-hmm. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Yes. And I, in trying to make some sense of these, of even opening up this conversation, there's two words I might be using more than one. Conflation. Now, conflation is when you take two like things and form them into one, or three or more like. But when you take things that have a lot of commonality and you put them and you create one central character, that's a conflated character. So in many ways, I mean, again, this is going to be difficult because, we're talking to a lot of people out there, and from my perspective, there is no straight story. Some stories are straighter than others, but all of them, to me, because of retellings, possibly translations, they all become mythos. And to me, mythos really means memory.
Yes, memory, and that's why it's important to find it in our own DNA. And that crystalline palace, that's located right at the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is all about memory, and that's the shape of the seahorse. That's the seahorse reference, and it's memory. And when we look at that flow that we were referring to as the serpentine kundalini rising, it's actually following the path of the golden mean, which is to say, in sequential steps, depending on your perspective, is getting larger or smaller. And it's so beautiful in that it looks more like a seahorse at that place in the crystalline palace, which is in your own temple, between these two temples.
Mm-hmm. So to me, like a case in point of conflation would be that reptiles. So snakes are reptiles. So then we have that, and then we have serpents, and then we have dragons, and then we have plasma.
Mm-hmm.
And many people are not that familiar with plasma. The closest thing to seeing the behavior of plasma is fire. Watching fire. I mean, I remember I had a wood stove, that at some point, if you turned it down enough, it was just kind of burning the gases. And across the top, where the gases were coming out of these jets that recirculate, you'd see these plasma currents like just snaking along. I mean, it was this dance, and it didn't look like fire so much as it was a plasma. I mean, you could actually look like something you could pour into a bowl,
like the filaments coming off the sun.
But it actually, but again, it just looked like something. If you could almost decant it and hold it in a bowl. I mean, fire doesn't look like it wants to be poured. Plasma looks like almost like it wants to be poured. Almost like it has a gravity, where fire has an anti-gravity. Wants to lift up. Plasma can actually settle.
Plasma, in my experience, is also the seahorse shape. It's so beautiful.
Well, there we go. We have this kind of arcing, and and if we see plasma jets, especially the ones that snap off, we'll see them kind of come up into this kind of arc, and then as they arc out is when they kind of snap off, and so you kind of get this curved head, almost like a head, like a seahorse or a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that much of the cosmic dragon, especially with the European dragon, is kind of this negative, almost reptilian energy, where when you get into like the sign of the dragon in Chinese astrology, it's really talking about a celestial dragon. And I believe the celestial dragons are in fact plasma currents, and I believe plasma currents have energy. And matter of fact, if it's almost the way the intelligence at the center of the galaxy or the sun, it's almost like how packets are thrown at us. They're thrown in plasmic packets.
And many of our ancient artifacts show plasma jets as actually being a wormhole. And that's what it's for, transportation. That's another example. Another thing about, whether it's dragons, draconian, reptilian, whatever that is, so much of it has been colored into disinformation to try to divert or derail us from going and looking there. And so you really have to use your own heart, use your own gut in discerning this information, because you might be having some really valuable information, and then a little piece of disinformation is tossed in there with you. So it's pretty important to be always discerning back to your own DNA. What's a match here with your heart? What's a match?
Well, as our own friend, the ambassador, has told us, like when often what's said as serpent means nobles.
Right.
And if I recall correctly, the term that's used, the Hebrew term is nagash.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's also used in some of the Vedic texts as well.
Well, they call
Naga.
it nagas.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, of course, what's that nasty little thing that they're putting in? They found in vaccines, nagales.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's almost that we also have who's looking at what. From one side, depending on what side, I mean, when you're reading the Vedas, you have these two warring sides, each who are considered, semi-divine, and each one has their own agenda, but they're each other's enemy. So from one side, this side is bad. From this side, that side is bad. Depending on who's telling the story, you have a bad guy.
And isn't that alchemy, though, is bringing them both together, right? The opposition. We talked about that in a recent mystic view as well. But the Ida and the Pingala, as it moves up your spinal column, is also, we could think of these energies in their polarity as male female, but you know what? We need both. It's not warring one against the other. It's that central rod that unites both, and they're essential. You can't have one overpower the other. We can't have this age of matriarchal energy and then have the next age patriarchal energy. We need to come to this place where we have the wisdom of both. And the serpent always has represented wisdom. Back to the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing is, if you think of current and traveling in a direction, and let's say if you have a circle where it's just continuously going, and then you snap that circle somewhere, so you're going to have, and you just cause a gap, so now it jumps the gap, but it's coming from one way, going into the other. And basically what you end up is the one that it's coming out of would be considered the male energy, and the one it's receiving would be the female. But before they were broken, when it was in a kind of an androgynous thing, it was just an energy. Mm-hmm. So it's really, when you see those two noses, as Dan Winter says, the pine cones kissing, which is where you complete the circle. Because if you get enough distance and the arc can't jump, then you just kind of have this is kind of like pulling, this one's delivering, but they're not meant, one's not meant to just give, and one's not meant to just pull. They're really just opposite, and you bring them together, and then you have the circuit completed.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently the fun is in separating it and then creating that little arc in the middle where you get some sparks and some activity. Just an endless circle. Blah, blah, blah. And apparently in that little jump is where the interesting stuff happens.
Well, there's a 0 point there. There's the still point. Now we can find that through meditation in our own beings. But how beautiful it is to simply go and lay on a table between the Therify device and really enjoy and interact with your beta mind, consciously knowing with that plasma.
So let's get back to Enki and Enlil. And also,
yeah, let's do that. And Marduk, maybe.
And who? Marduk?
Marduk.
Yeah. If you, maybe Marduk is. We start getting into family history, and he also jumps around more. Enki and Enlil a little bit easier to pin down.
Yeah, I just like Marduk because he was responsible for Chinese acupuncture and Tai Chi. But really that came from Enki. That was dear old dad teaching him. So carry on.
Well, Enki certainly got around, but I think according to either Anton Parks or Dan Winter, and it feels kind of good that at one point the war between the brothers that was happening a lot in the Middle East, she was like, I'm out of here, and headed east. And basically it was her who initially brought that energy and civilization. Of course she got, she didn't stay alone for long, but whoever pursued her. And of course we do want to introduce some female, again, we want to introduce some of the female people, entities, because they are crucial, because again, we have because of where we're dealing with when we're kind of entering what we now consider remembered history, or where most, again, mythos, memory. And the reason I kind of want to make that mythos, because again, it's not like this is a picture, it's a memory, and memories have a fuzzy factor. And it's that fuzz that makes where we can't, it's hard to have absolute truth, where you kind of have to take anything, even if what you're accepting as truth, as mythos, just so you keep it a little bit fuzzy around the edges so you don't get retarded about it.
Yeah, and that's fine until we can really, really lock into the frequency that is actually the photon that's actually carrying the true story, the true information. Oh, but that could take us into timelines. Let's not go there. Let's get back to Enki. Let's get back to his wife or his half-sister.
Well, I want to finish with Enlil.
Oh yeah, okay.
So I mean, just again, and again with the polarity of everything, and polarity there are polarities, but polarized thinking is where we get stupid. Again, we have these two polarities, which are really a continuity, one arcing to the other, and it's in what I call the arc field that reality occurs. The poles do not represent reality, and when people start polarizing, they're basically all the shades of gray are gone. It's only black or white. Complete brilliant light or utter void. And meanwhile, the rainbow, which helps us break that white light into its colors, is how reality is experienced. Is experienced in these gradations of colors and some shades of gray.
And really, that's how we can slow it down to understand it. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're just back to the one spiral, all that is.
So, again, because people bring polarized thinking, and they know Enki worked loved mankind and tried to do good things and make them not just be laborers. And Enlil was cast as the bad person. He caused the flood. He didn't. And now, please, everybody who's caused the flood, there's also some conflation with Yahweh and Enlil. And I don't know if we're going to really try and pull it out. So this way here, whatever certain people, who knows where certain people want to be taken, and how important it even would be to take them anywhere.
I think more important is going to be the perspective and understanding. Look at, if you are say a cattle farmer, cattle rancher, and you're raising cattle for beef, are you a bad guy? Do your neighbors think you're a bad guy because that's what you're doing? That's kind of the equivalent of Enlil or Enki.
Yes.
He's supporting mankind. He wants us to have the ability for perfect compression so that we can continue our life after we pass here, that our soul continues on. And so the perspective is really important. It's not to jump onto one side of the polarity. Yeah, Enlil's bad and Enki's good. I like Enki.
Yeah, well, again, he had
supporting my values,
He was not, certainly, and as anybody thinks Enki is good, there's certainly stories of him doing things, and although some of it had to do with pressure. Again, he was part of a family. There were family politics. If he was going to stay in a family, he had to occasionally do things that kept the family at peace as best as that was possible. But I mean, again, the point you make, for humanity, from Enlil's perspective, was a mammalian resource. Just like cows, sheep, and pigs are human mammalian resources that we treat as, a good farmer would treat him real good before he cuts his throat. Okay? So, I mean, we can't, unless we're evil for doing that, and I bet you a lot of people are not going to say, oh yeah, we're evil for doing that. Oh no, we have to, fine. And from Enlil's perspective, he did what he was managing his livestock. All right, we were livestock to him. Enki was had a little more of an evolved aspect to it, and actually had a personal. It's almost like we were pets to Enki. We were livestock to Enlil. Just like you wouldn't think of eating your dog or your cat. All right, so think of us as kind of like Enki's dogs and cats in a way. It's ultimate. I think there was a little bit more. So then we're going to get into is that obviously there is a God spark in us. We all, though it makes humanity unique, is we know there is a God. It doesn't even make a difference who might have poured us, tweaked us, whatever. The eternal part of us, the reason why we can get a communication in our heart from what we clearly know as a divine being, is because it was allowed to be there, or in our creation was put there. Because you look out in the cosmos and you realize the ultimate source, creator, is big. So, and then we get fractals of it. So we're going to kind of have the big creator, and then we're going to have fractals of the creator. And some of those fractals are a lot more like the original one, and some of them are like bad snowflakes. Or it's almost like when you make crystals, when Dr. Emoto made crystals, and if you thought nice thoughts, they were all crystals, but some of them were really quite gorgeous, and some of them were really quite deformed. They are fractals. These crystals are fractals. And so depending on the energy in that fractal of the all, depends on what kind of crystal you end up with. How was that put out?
Right, and so take that a step further and now apply that to the cloning, and we can see how one of those resulting entities, we'll call them, might have had some error in it. And isn't that the story? Was it Enki that had him for destruction because he had not turned out quite as they had hoped, or was that
Enlil? Enlil.
Well, that was Enlil. Okay, yeah. So Enlil then was somebody. Some female had taken a fancy to him and preserved him and enabled him to carry on.
Right. Now we have this. That's where we have to be really clear about these beings when they're cloned and coming out. They're adults.
Mm-hmm.
So like some female, like, oh, cute little Enlil, and then she raised him. He was an adult, and she went, okay, I can work. I think I want this one.
I can work with this.
And the other thing is, now, Enlil, the reason he kind of got stewardship of the earth was because his mother was from the royal line.
Right.
Okay. But she was a clone also. So basically, from best I can tell, Enlil was not an ensouled being.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the problems. Enki's mother was a Kadishtu priestess.
Right.
One of the life designers, you could say kind of like almost an angelic class, working with the creator, with the secrets of the creator's ability to put life into things. And so they carried this and were able to do it with life forms that they worked with. So since Enki, even though he was created as a clone, had Kadishtu in him, he had the soul spark. And, and this is what makes him so different than Enlil. God could speak to Enki. God could be in Enki's heart. God was inaccessible to Enlil. Mm-hmm. So that's why Enlil thought he was, oh, I'm God. Go ahead. I'm willing, there was no shame because he had no sense of something greater than himself. Enki had that sense.
Right. And that might lead us to why humanity here on Earth is so important, and maybe an important commodity or of such greater interest to our galactic neighbors, because of that fact, because of what we have in our DNA.
So we're going to pause here, because we always do a pause, and kind of maybe come back and start introducing the female aspect of this story. And we'll be back momentarily.
Global Mission of Peace is a worldwide team of like-hearted individuals focused on a new paradigm of unity, peace, and understanding.
Unity with all people across all borders.
Peace with every faith and religion.
Understanding the true nature of the political, financial, and power structures of our world.
Our focus is not in changing these structures, but in offering a new reality, a new consciousness. Don't you think it's time?
Okay, welcome back to the second part of, well, not even second part, just continuation of the whole show. Again, we took a little break. So we have kind of laid out some of the Anunnaki characters, with Anu, again, being Papa, and then the two sons who have different ideas, and because of the royal lineage of the clone that Enlil was, and the kind of lower or priest lineage of Enki, priestess Enki, and lineage in Enki, he was given kind of control of the waters and the Abzu, which is actually, anybody familiar with people like people in the Mount Shasta, any of the kind of underground societies, that he was given anything under the earth and the waters. Everything on the air was represented, was where Enlil. So basically Enlil kind of had control of the earth, and Enki had control of any part of the earth you couldn't see if you were walking around. So most importantly, and always hidden behind, and of course it will stay hidden behind, or we're trying to bring it out, and it's a big part of what happened on the planet when we started having the patriarchal religions, where, I mean, really, and I mean, here we are, all of us on this planet have come from a mother. And then suddenly we get into our, our more recent scripture, and there's no mother to be seen. Jesus is allowed to have a mother, but we don't seem to have a mother. That if you allow yourself to really take in the landscape, and if you allow yourself to go into deep meditation, there's like a disconnect to not have a mama.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one, but she got buried, and there could be a lot of reasons. There could be the pendulum swinging. There's the whole fear of women that might play into, supposedly, with the male female. I mean, if I want to be really fair, and I look at from a chromosome point of view, and you look at the female, it's 2 X chromosomes. You look at the male, and basically it looks like X and Y, but it's not really a Y, it's an X with a leg missing. Okay. So, and then I had this, I guess, preparing for the show last night, I saw, let's say you have exactly the same 2. Okay, so you take the other one, you rip the leg off. Now you can take the XY and superimpose it over the X, and it'll complete itself, because that invisible leg will have been there. But as long as males stay alone, there's something missing. Together, again, you kind of have that overlay, and the whole double X comes there, but the male is there laid on top of it, and it kind of allows for a dynamism that's not there. I mean, the male, this is not to marginalize or make either side greater than the other. It's just to show how each side is required, and that to kind of have a cosmology without the female aspect just is odd. I'll just say that, odd for me, for my thing. For some people, apparently it really works, and we have a couple of billion people on the planet that is completely okay with.
Perhaps just because they haven't actually thought about it, but okay.
Well, and we have, historically, I mean, again, the Gnostics, the Cathars, who considered themselves Christians, were wiped out for that very reason, for entertaining those thoughts. Those thoughts were considered so toxic or dangerous. Mm-hmm. They weren't. I mean, it wasn't like the churches were wiped out; the people were wiped out. I mean, it was a genocide, basically.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So there's something about that idea that really rubs, at least Rome, the wrong way. Mm-hmm. It really rubbed Rome the wrong way. And look, you don't hear a whole. I mean, Mary gets good. A nice reception in the Eastern Orthodox, which is not Rome. Mm-hmm. Mary gets a really warm reception in Islam. So does Jesus. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better reception and reverence of 2 people.
Right.
what happens with the other guys is another story. We'll leave them out because, we want to be positive about things. And so anyway, so there is a group. And again, now one of the things that seems that could feed this is, somebody just got here. I have to close my door so I don't get certain extraneous sounds in here. Yeah. One of the things that might feed this is, according to this cosmic history, that the males, especially, we're talking about the reptilian males, were such insufferable dicks that the females had abandoned them kind of centuries ago, where they're for all intents and people, they had become separate races. Even though they're the same race, gender separated them, and they developed, in which is where you got a female language, which I think in Anthropology called Immensa. And I forget what the male language is called. But they were separate languages. And so we kind of have this antagonism between the sexes that is a part of the cosmic history. And I think that plays into our DNA to some extent. And so, and again, when things swung to the patriarchy, and I think part of it, there was, I think some of it, there's an energetic, we haven't mentioned the archons. And one of the reasons we haven't mentioned the archons, because they really get confused. I mean, some people have archons as actual physical beings. The Gnostics, especially some of the written Gnostic material, at most kind of has them showing up occasionally as reptile looking, or like fetuses, which is kind of like a gray. But I'm not. I think they were actually confused. I mean, the best I can. I mean, I don't really want to lay out the whole cosmology, especially of the Gnostics, which is so rich. But from what for me, the archons would play a role similar to what we have of the jinn in Islamic understanding, except and the jinn are a race, and they have good jinn and bad jinn. But overall, when you mention jinn, usually it's bad. I guess because the good ones leave you alone, and so there's no real issue there. The bad ones try to get you to do nasty stuff and are aligned with Dajjal and Islamic mythology. Telling of the story, Dajjal was created by Allah as a kind of a test. He's basically what Christians would call Antichrist. And supposedly he's head of the jinn. It gets, again, I don't want to get all, because these are part of their mythos, and parsing it out can get confusing. But the archons are really part of a mind parasite, or a parasitic bad influence on humans. Zoroaster had the devas of good counsel, devas of bad counsel. And he didn't make one. There was no good or evil devas. There were just ones that would tell you stuff that would help you, and other ones that would tell you stuff that would probably hurt you. And his counsel was, pay attention to the good ones, ignore the bad ones. It's almost like Jesus saying, resist not evil. Just don't do it. Don't resist it. Just don't do it. It's not like fighting them off. It's just like you got this whole other place to look. It's just like, put it behind me, Satan, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I just really feel that part of also what kind of created this really warlike thing wasn't just the male energy, was in fact some kind of parasitic energy that just gave a lot of bad counsel. And as energetic beings, they thrived on what has been called loosh by certain people. I mean, we just need a term, but there's an outpouring of energy that energy beings can feed off of. And so just like, we might like to, somebody here might like to eat a steak, they'll like to eat a person, the kind of energy that comes from creating a steak, killing animals, killing people, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, what I'm trying to introduce here is that I really feel that part of the patriarchal warlike mentality isn't really so much a male thing, as is part of this parasitic energy, that because males are kind of the protectors, they kind of took that protective energy and just put it into the psychopathic overdrive. And then we ended up with the kind of the world we have today. because once again, I'm really trying to make no good or evil, but there is disease. And I really feel that the warlike patriarchy is a diseased male energy. So let's bring in the Kadishtu.
Okay.
Unless you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that quickly, because you had mentioned having perhaps the leg ripped off of one of the X chromosomes, and if that happened to be the area of intuition for men, where they no longer could rely on their own intuition, which is a feminine aspect for the man, then certainly they would be vulnerable and needing to reach out to somebody else's intuition and very susceptible to all the thought forms of the aforementioned jinn and so on. And so that would also make them very fearful of the female, because the female is very intuitive and has that strongly intact.
Yeah, and I can see how that could be threatening, because here are these, big, strong, very capable, physically able to protect women, but when it comes to kind of figuring things out, they have to go, can you help me here? It's like, I have a little input because I'm not getting it. And that just might have been ego crushing. All right. So now we have to get to according to the works of Anton Parks, the Kadishtu were a very ancient race, like the reptilians are. And all I have to do is look at Earth. I mean, really the first dominant species of any note are the reptiles. I mean, if there's a process of life creation throughout, on any planet, it looks like reptiles basically are going to be the first ones that show up. Amphibians first, and then maybe reptiles. And that's the other interesting thing about Enki, is he wasn't so much reptile. He had some reptilian blood, but he also had something called the Amargi. The Amgal are reptiles. The Amargi are amphibians. And he had amphibian blood in him. And so, they're just, he's a very complex genetic character on his own. But it was his mother, this Kadishtu, a life designer, that brings in that there is a group of beings that are kind of carrying the creator's torch around, so to speak, and helping it, nourishing it, mothering the development of species in any place that life can happen. And they land, and there's a suitable thing, they can kind of, the proper life form, especially in a human type, again, a bipedal, 2 hands, 1 head type of thing. I mean, just like the reptilians and the even amphibians, they were bipedal. I mean, they kind of got around like we did. 1 head, 2 eyes, really a duplication, but a reptile duplication, or an amphibious duplication, or a bird-like duplication. And so we're kind of introducing this. I think we see it, and Dan says it as well, in the Dune series. We have the Bene Gesserit, who is there's the Reverend Mother, and they kind of, they're forced onto their own. And then you have common females, but and this is like there were females, but there was a whole kind of priestess class. And they kind of held some of the secrets of the universe. They worked with the creator, who to me is ultimately non-genderized. It's like, if the creator is like that circle, all the energy's there. It's not until you break that you create an outpouring side and a receiving side, and then you start having some kind of gender type stuff. And it's really in the Anton Parks books that we start getting introduced to these Kadishtu. And one of the most fascinating parts, and from now I heard it was in the original French book, The Ages of Uras, but I think now it's in the Eden book. And they talk about the Kadishtu coming to this planet way before Enki was here. Because Enki kind of came. I mean, he came here with his mother. after, and then little Enki showed up, and then you had the kind of like the real reptilian, not the Anunnaki, the Dracos, showing up and creating all kinds of havoc. I mean, the cast of characters is involved, and the beauty of Anton Park's work is he actually gives the names to these various groupings of species. I mean, the Draco alone have 3 groups. They kind of have your real common Draco that's was green skinned. You had your next kind of like the knights or warrior class were red skinned, and then your royal class were albino. And when we say albino, we mean white, not white like I'm white or Shelley's white, like white. Okay, albino, just like Dracula pasty white. If you put like pancake makeup on white, that kind of white. And that would, and they were supposed they were those with the big wings. I mean, here we go. Oh, isn't that make believe? Well, apparently make believe is coming out of somebody's memory. And so, I mean, and they were the ones who kind of really stirred things up. But Enki himself was a mixed being. He wasn't a Draco, and I'm from what I can tell, Enlil wasn't a Draco either. But so anyway, Anton Parks breaks down these multiple, even the griffins that we see in Lion. He has names for all of these different and the roles they play. And the leonine ones, who's the Sukal, I think is their name. They supposedly are the divine army of the associated with the Elohim and with the life designers. I mean, basically, when things are really getting ugly, they will come in and rip the place apart, literally. When order needs to be restored. And even the Draco don't like when the Sukal show up. When the Sukal show up, they know that they have overstepped their bounds. And that's kind of like, and the Kaddish do have work with them and can bring them in. Anyway, we're probably getting a little bit science fiction here for a lot of people. But if you read these new Anton Parks books, especially the Eden book, what I'm saying to you will actually just be laid out there in rich detail, a mythos, to be sure, but still, that's mythos is how we remember things. It's how we pull anything out of the past, unless of course we can actually access our DNA and experience it for ourselves. But even once anybody ever done a deep meditation and goes, aha, I got it, you come back into beta brain and you have little tatters of it. And then with these tatters, you put the tatters up and have to fill in the rest. And God only knows if you when you have to fill that in with your beta brain from what you pulled from those deep theta states, whether or not you're not creating a little mythos of your own, even though you took it from source of yourself.
Well, that's true, because we often have, we inevitably will have filters that it has to pass through, and but the photon still carries the true information. And so Enoch was another name. In fact, John Dee, I think that's very significant that he chose to use that term Enoch. But it references back to the ancient Sumerian version of Enki, right? And how that story is relevant to this time on our planet, because this is the age where we are anticipating a change in our evolution, that we become new humans of some sort. Right along, and so they believe that because they believe our DNA came from the stars and was destined to return, like the phoenix. The Greek word for phoenix is derived from the Egyptian Pa and Hanok, and that is meaning the house of Enoch. So it's not just Egyptian, it's not just Sumerian. We have this Enochian knowledge that says that these cycles come to completion and then they start again. And that's pretty much where we're at.
Yeah, and to me, this is a kind of a case where we're dealing with obviously people who existed in history. Now, whether certain people writing certain books don't pull people out of history and drop them in their history, who knows? It kind of looks like.
I think that happens.
There's a little of that going on. It's like, it even many of the king and queens list, the royal list that the royal chroniclers, it's like, oh, we need somebody hot, we need somebody juicy in this line. Okay, this one's a good one. Okay, we're going to put that one right about here. Here you go, king. And, You get to keep your head, and here's gold. All right.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we cannot think that, I mean, just observing modern humans and just going and seeing how people can be a little bit squirrely sometimes. And then even if they are of the highest integrity, sometimes there's a matter of keeping your head and maybe just playing a little bit with things. No real harm done, and at the secret layers, you've actually told the truth. But I mean, in other words, you told the truth that if somebody knows it, and there's only about 2 people on the planet who know it, but this way here, you've kept your integrity and kept your head at the same time. We just cannot drop that out in the creation of scribes presenting history that had been ordered for them to, I mean, I don't see the average. There aren't too many works credited to royal lines. They're usually to priestly or scribal lines.
That's right.
And usually, in most cases, there's somebody above that. Once again, we can just see how things can get opened up, no matter what the claims are.
Right, that's right. And if we had time, we could get into the monatomic gold and all of that, where that's applicable, but maybe that's another show. But isn't that a fascinating link to this whole conversation?
I do, because I'm not tracking the time, but I have a feeling we're like north of 45 minutes, and we try not to kind of bring it between 45 minutes and an hour. I mean, I think we have one show that maybe ran 32 minutes in our whole history of Mystic Views, and it was probably a night we just dried up early. This is not a dry night. But so if we accomplish anything, we try to get the Annunaki, Enlil, Enki, the 2 brothers. There's no bad, there's no good. They have one had kind of a soul spark and could actually communicate with God. One didn't have a soul spark and was kind of cold and didn't care much. It was take a pure bureaucrat business, whatever. The humans were created to perform a task, and if there's too many of them, you cull them, and if they get noisy, you drown them in a flood. And the most thing, you don't make them too smart, because the last thing you want them to do is asking questions and being a pain in the ass. It's not personal, strictly business.
That's right. And we can find them outside of ourselves, but I know that they are inside of us. I know that that's part of our DNA. I know that from personal experience.
Yeah.
The DNA, the ancient Kabbalistic tree of life, portrayed in the Torah, is now even viewed by science as vibrating, living structures, something like a fixed tape recording. And so I know from personal experience.
And
that kind of, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, with a case in point, was something I was alluding to earlier with the Torah. Okay, right. And especially we now know that this, written in the language of light. So right. Then you're going to have like your basic, simple reading of the words as if you're reading a history, a story, whatever. Okay, that'll be the very literal reading. Then there's going to be the deeper understandings where, words like snake really mean noble. So that means there was kind of a person, then we're going to get down to where we actually, apparently at some point, there's living light with kind of like the illumination of what really went on there. But is anybody getting that other than maybe a few mystics who can't share it because only the initiated can share it, and therefore the rest of us are left with our different levels. So again, here we can have a case where the Torah might be the most accurate form of information on the planet, but 2 people know it, 3 people, whatever, and they can't tell anybody. So this story, the implications are rich, but really, it really seems like you can parse out Enki and Enlil in the Torah.
Yes.
And they have different names. And again, I think there's a conflation I think there was a divine being who I think might have been speaking to Moses. And then once things got going, then Lil shows up, a real thing, and he's got armies and stuff. And this is, I'm that, and they conflate it. Or, I mean, you can that's what I'm talking about, conflation, where you can actually have the source coming through at some level that is part of the story, and then an actual flesh and blood being who is, like the kind of in charge of the planet says, well, yeah, I'm that being too, and we better, and then you get conflation and confusion.
Well, it is true. It is true. And I do see it on both sides. However, that story of Moses is a really good example, because that story of Moses is in the Bible. It's in so many of the ancient sacred texts verbatim. Mm-hmm. The same exact stories. Same as the Jesus story, 12 disciples. The whole astral theology theme is always there, and it's always there to guide us. And what I've seen is that there was a point in our history where it was no longer encouraged for us to be able to figure this out, and so they kind of equally divided up the cosmos. Okay, so Catholicism, you guys get to have this, the Hindus and the Buddhists and all that, you get this sign, the Om, right? But really, those are all just star maps. Those are all star maps, and it's all taking us back to Enki, to our ancestors, to our history. But as above, so below. It's in us. And that's why meditation is so valuable, because now you don't have to rely on somebody interpreting Torah for you or studying for 50 years so you can figure it out yourself. I mean, it's beautiful just to read the Torah, and I believe that the frequency just of passing those letters before your eyes, even though consciously you don't get it, I still think there's value to that. But come on, we need to step up the pace here.
Yeah.
We need to get this information now. And I think that's the value that we get from doing our own meditation, connecting with our own source, because it's there for each of us. And it doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or Catholic or whatever, it doesn't matter. Everybody's got the DNA with the information in it.
Yes. And okay, I'm going to do some shout outs here to close the show. Basically, okay, the Anton Parks, Anton, Parks is Parks, no E's or anything hidden in there, like Simon Parks has an E in his name. So Anton Parks. Eden, I think, is the name of one book, and that kind of really might have some of the juicier stuff, and then I think more of the really expansive stuff is in Secrets of the Dark Stars, or Dark Star. But if you go to, just type in Anton Parks, and I'm quite sure, those two basic books, who I think they came out in just recent years, and they're written in English. They originally came from French, and I think there are actually two books from the original bigger works of the Age of Horus written in French. Another shout out I want is a man named Sheikh Imran Hussein. He's this really delightful Sufi, Sunni Sufi scholar with a great sense of humor, a huge heart. And what I like, if you want to understand somebody's scripture written in a language that needs to be read in that language for you to pull it out, then you need a good narrator who speaks the language, can really pull what needs to be pulled out. And then rather than giving you these words which are translations are clunky, tells the story and interprets the words for you, so you get the heart of what is being told. I mean, there's probably nothing more important than what he does, especially with, again, the misunderstanding of Islam, of him showing what a social movement went on, just how important Islam was to a tribal world at each other's throats, and the wisdom and the love that's hidden in there by a man who has enough love and heart in him to see it there to begin with, and then put it into his own words. So Sheikh Imran Hussein, look for some of the more modern ones, some of the real recent ones. I think he uses henna in his beard. So in most of them, he has kind of like a reddish beard. And some of his recent ones I think he cut his beard a little bit, and it's like my color, which is the real color. I don't know. I guess he just likes the red color. But if you see him, he has a sense of humor. He has a huge heart. And if you just want to get in touch with what's at the heart for 1 billion plus people on this planet, please listen to him. A shout out for him. Because again, as we sit here and we do all Annunaki and Annunaki, again, there's 1 billion people on the planet who are pulling their reality from the Quran. And to me, Sheikh Imran Hussein is a very good way for people to, again, if you want to get exposed to the love that's in that book, you need him.
I think that's a great place to really come to is the love element, because that's really, when it comes down to it, that's who we are, that's what we are, that's what the light is, that's what the photon is, that communicates across all the vast space. Our
last show on power, and where we basically come up with God, again, what's the perception of God's power, and for us, God's power is movement and love.
Right, the movement of love.
Anything else that isn't moving like that, to me, that's abuse of what appears to be power, but it's really just bully. It's being a bully is not power. Power, the real power is love. Okay.
You should write a song about that.
I got a bunch. I have a few songs that I'm working on currently. So do you want to say goodbye to everybody first?
Well, goodbye, everybody. I love you.
And I love you too. And we'll see you next time. And until then, God bless you all and be well.